Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
When considering hormonal imbalance, menopause in women is frequently the first thing that comes to mind, with its characteristic symptoms like hot flashes and mood swings. However, the question remains, what about men? Are they prone to their own set of hormonal imbalances? If so, what does it look like? And how can we address it? This episode is the second of three that delves into critical issue of hormonal imbalances in men, women, and children, exploring their symptoms and potential causes and effective remedies. Mission Evolution Radio TV show is coming to you around the world on the Voice of Canada Broadcast Network, www.vocbn.ca. Dr. Deb Matthews is with us now to shed light on the often missed hormonal issues that many men experience. America's happy hormonal doctor, Dr. Deb, is the best-selling author of Why Can't I Keep Up Anymore? A guide to regaining energy, focus, and peak physical and sexual performance for men over 40. And This Is Not Normal, a busy woman's guide to hormonal imbalances. Dr. Deb is an international speaker, educator, wife, and mom of 4 boys. She's been featured on national podcasts, radio, and over 100 TV appearances on NBC, ABC, CBS, PBS, and FOX. Her medical practice, Signature Wellness, is located in Charlotte, North Carolina. Her website, signaturewellness.org. Dr. Deb, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
It's so nice to be here with you.
It's such a pleasure. So, as a medical doctor, how did you decide to focus on hormones?
Well, I started off with my own story, as many of us do. I was tired all the time. I was cold. Even here in the summer in North Carolina, I would take a sweater with me everywhere because when I would go into air-conditioned restaurants and in stores, I would just be freezing. And I didn't understand what was happening to me. I didn't understand why I was feeling this way. I was irritable and I found myself shrieking at my kids over the littlest things. And then I felt so guilty for being this terrible mom. And it was really my husband who bore the brunt of my Wicked Witch of the West impersonation. It was just really confusing because nothing in my medical training helped me understand what was going on with me. And it wasn't until I started learning about hormones that I started to understand what was going on. And really the way that I got my first introduction to this wasn't at medical school or at a medical lecture. I actually read a book that was written by Suzanne Summers. Remember the Thigh Master lady, right? The celebrity. But once I understood how the hormones were affecting me, it really allowed me to open my mind and realize that there was this whole other world of hormones out there that they hadn't taught me at medical school. And it's not woo-woo medicine. I mean, this is really based in science and research. And when I got my hormones back in balance, it allowed me to get my energy back, and my kids got their mom back. My husband got his wife back, and I got my life back. But it just didn't feel right to go back to writing prescriptions all day, every day. And so I retired from my old job. I completely retrained. And now for almost 20 years, I've been helping men and women get their hormones back in balance so that they can really get well, often get off a lot of those prescription medicines and love the way they feel.
Well, that's a wonderful thing. I mean, if you think about it, don't hormones run the whole operation, really?
Yeah, they're chemical messengers and they tell our body what to do. And so if our hormones are not properly balanced, then we're not quite getting the right signals. And that can cause problems in all areas of our body, for men and for women.
How about children?
Children have hormones too. Their hormones are not as unless they have a disease, which children can have a disease, that's what endocrinologists help with. But for the most part, children's hormones, until they hit puberty, are relatively calm and well behaved. It's once we hit puberty that's when things start to sometimes go off the rails.
So is it common for hormone imbalances to be missed when diagnosed? And if so, why?
Yeah, doctors are trained to treat diseases. So there are certain diseases that have to do with hormones, like diabetes, for example. Insulin is a hormone that regulates our blood sugar. Hypothyroidism. We can have tumors where your body makes way too much of a hormone and it makes you very, very sick. Those kinds of hormone issues are typically picked up eventually by our regular medical, community. But there are a lot of more subtle hormone problems that do get missed. So hypothyroidism is a really good example because there are a lot of women who have thyroid problems. Men can have thyroid problems too, but it's much more common in women. And this is something that tends to happen gradually over time. And in medicine, we don't make the diagnosis until somebody is way far gone with like significant symptoms. But this is something that can take many years in order to develop. And this was one of the things that was happening to me. I had symptoms for 10 years. I had an enlarged thyroid gland, and doctors would look at my neck when I was in medical school and tell me I needed to go get my thyroid tested. But when I went and got my blood work done, I was told that my labs were normal. So I had symptoms for 10 years before it finally was bad enough in order to make the diagnosis. Menopause is another one where a lot of women will have all kinds of symptoms that get missed. Things like heart palpitations, anxiety, depression, insomnia, weight gain. And when we go to the doctor to complain that we don't feel well, we end up with sleeping pills and antidepressants. And, whatever the symptom is, we've got a pill for that. But if the real problem is our hormones, we're not solving the right problem. And maybe an even bigger challenge is perimenopause, which is the 10 to 15 years before we go through menopause. Because if you're in your late 30s or your early 40s, generally nobody's thinking about menopause yet, but our hormones are already starting to shift. And so women sometimes don't feel well, and they've got a whole list of symptoms, but it's not generally well recognized when they go see their doctor. And so a lot of times that one's missed.
So if you're one of these unfortunate few, whether male or female, that your hormones have gotten to go to an extreme imbalance before it's recognized, how long does it take to turn it around and how do they turn it around?
Well, that's a really great question. Often it can turn around quite quickly. So sometimes, depending on what the problem is, there are lifestyle changes that we can make, nutritional supplements that we can use, things that we can do naturally to kind of get the hormones back into more of a level of where they should be. Sometimes we have to use hormone replacement therapy. And if we do end up using hormone replacement therapy, for the most part, people can feel better fairly quickly, like within, a few weeks generally. And sometimes it can take a little bit longer to get things really balanced out. But so it just depends whether we're able to fix things naturally or whether we need to turn to hormone replacement therapy.
So what exactly, this might seem like a silly question, but it's what are hormones?
Yeah. So hormones are chemical messengers. So they are little molecules in our body. They're generally proteins that float through our bloodstream. They're made in glands. So our thyroid gland, for example, they're made in different glands in our body, and they float through our bloodstream to all throughout the body, and then they give instructions. So if we take thyroid as an example, thyroid hormones made in your thyroid gland float through your bloodstream, tell your body to generate more heat, create more energy, have your heart beat faster. So more thyroid hormone means faster heart rate, faster metabolic rate, more energy is generated. Lower thyroid levels mean lower heart rate, less energy made. And so our body is constantly adjusting the level of our thyroid hormone in order to keep things stable. Insulin is another example. It helps to regulate our blood sugar. So more insulin tells our cells to take sugar from the bloodstream and store it inside the cells so our blood sugar level can come down. So as the insulin level goes up, our blood sugar level goes down, and vice versa.
That makes sense. So, why are women's hormones so much more um, complex and tend to be hormone imbalances tend to show up more in women than men?
Well, for women, we have more circadian rhythms with our hormones. So for women on a monthly basis, our female hormones change, going with our menstrual cycle. And estrogen is going up and down over the month. Progesterone is another one that goes up and down over the month. Even testosterone for women goes up and down a little bit over the month. For men, their hormones are more even. So they don't have these monthly cycles where things are going around and around. So for men, they can have hormone deficiencies, especially testosterone, but it would be something that happens very gradually over time, and it's maybe a little bit less noticeable. But for women, because our hormones are fluctuating like 1 week from the next, our moods can change, our energy levels can change, our emotions can change. And so it's not so easy to just say that, for example, estrogen is low or something is high when they're constantly going up and down. And so before menopause, that's one of the things that makes things really challenging. After menopause, when the hormones are just low, honestly, it can be easier because we don't have all those monthly up and downs anymore that we have to deal with. So it can be easier for us to get things straightened out.
So, what are the symptoms indicating a man may be suffering from a hormonal imbalance?
The symptoms that men have and the symptoms that women have are often very similar. But for men, it can be mood changes. It can be feeling just more depressed, just kind of more flat, unmotivated, maybe just not really feeling as much like doing the things that they used to really enjoy, whether that's playing a sport or going out with their friends. They just don't really care that much about it anymore. It can be more anxiety, worrying about things, stressing over little things that maybe wouldn't have bothered them anymore. It can impact confidence so that they, don't feel as good about themselves. It can impact motivation, competitive drive. So it really can have an impact on how they feel on the inside. Testosterone can have an important role on men's brains. So energy, quality of sleep, focus, and concentration can all suffer. Can have an important role on the physical body. So testosterone helps to maintain muscles. And if testosterone levels go down, muscle mass can go down, men can gain more body fat, and even the distribution of body fat can sort of change. So there's all kinds of different ways. And another important one is sexual function. So that can take a toll too if testosterone levels are down.
Well, it's time for us to take a station break. Dr. Deb and I will return very shortly, so don't go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. What causes men to have hormonal imbalances? With
You
us
know,
this
that's
hour discussing the role of hormones in men is Dr. Deb Matthew. Dr. Deb is the author of It's Not Normal, A Busy Woman's Guide to Hormonal Imbalances, and Why Can't I Keep Up Anymore? A guide to regaining energy, focus, and peak physical and sexual performance for men over 40. Dr. Deb, that is the question. Why do men develop hormonal imbalances?
one of the most obvious causes for men is age. As men get older, their testosterone levels start to decline over time. And so even men in their 40s can start to have lower testosterone levels, but commonly by the time men are in their 50s, and especially by the time they're in their 60s, testosterone levels can have significantly declined to the point where they can really feel a difference. But there are more reasons than just age, and this is why we're seeing low testosterone in younger and younger men. Another common reason for low hormones in men is stress. Cortisol is our main stress hormone, and cortisol goes up when we're under chronic stress, and cortisol shuts down testosterone. So when we have high cortisol, we can tend to get low testosterone. Another common reason for testosterone levels to go down is diabetes. When men have diabetes, their insulin is a problem, and that can cause testosterone levels to go down. So for men who have diabetes, they have a greater chance of having low testosterone, and vice versa. So when men have low testosterone from maybe another reason, that can make it more likely that they develop diabetes. And even if it's not full-blown diabetes, even if it's just pre-diabetes, already that can start to impact testosterone levels.
So there's a relationship between insulin and testosterone. What happens if you adjust the testosterone? What then happens to
Yeah.
the insulin?
If we adjust the testosterone, that can improve diabetes so that actually people can have better blood sugar control, possibly even maybe need less blood sugar medication. And the flip side is true too. If men can do a really good job of managing their diabetes, eating well, losing weight, following all the lifestyle recommendations, that can actually allow their testosterone level to come up a little bit naturally.
So if we do men suffer their own form of menopause?
Yes, so andropause is what we call it. And this is when the testosterone levels go down. And the main difference between men and women is that for women, menopause really smacks us in the face for a lot of women. Like our hormone levels come along and then they start to become erratic in perimenopause and then they crash and burn when we hit menopause. For men, though, because it's a much slower, gradual decline, it just tends to creep up on them. And they don't really notice that something's changed because it's happened so slowly. And what I hear men say a lot is, well, I'm not 18 anymore. I don't have as much energy, or I feel more achy, or, I don't feel as much like doing those things anymore. But I think it's just my age. That's what I hear from men all the time. I think it's just my age. But it doesn't necessarily have to be your age. It could be your testosterone.
So does testosterone relate in some way to heart disease?
Great question. For men, low testosterone is a risk factor for a lot of chronic diseases, including heart disease. So for men who have low testosterone, they have a greater risk of having diabetes, of having heart disease, dementia, arthritis, all sorts of osteoporosis and hip fractures. So all sorts of chronic diseases, the chance of those things go up when men are low in testosterone. And we know that men who have lower testosterone levels don't live as long as men who have higher testosterone levels. So we call this all-cause mortality. Death from any reason is actually higher in men with low testosterone.
So the medical test, you said that it doesn't usually show up until you're way out there. Is that the same with testosterone?
Well, a little bit, because it's how we interpret the test. So the typical way that we measure testosterone for men is we do a blood test. And the starting off test is called a total testosterone. And what doctors are trained to do is we go by what the lab says is the normal range. And so the lab has a set range. They've got, their numbers, and they've got their goalposts. This is the low of the range and this is the high end of the range. And so if your number lands somewhere in that range, you are told that you're normal. But the reality is that for all men, they're unique, and different men feel different at different levels of testosterone. So when men are down in the lower half of the normal range of testosterone, it's not uncommon for some men to have a lot of symptoms. So and the other thing I want to say is every lab sets their own normal range. So a man could go and have his testosterone level done, and his level could, at one lab could be considered normal, and the very same number at a different lab could be considered low. So the goalpost, the normal range is man-made. Somebody decided this is where we're going to put the stake in the ground and call it normal, but that doesn't mean that it's optimal, and that doesn't mean that everybody feels their best. So it's not uncommon for men who have testosterone levels in the lower end of the normal range to be told that they're normal, even though they have a lot of symptoms of low testosterone, and they might feel better if we boosted up their testosterone a little higher in the normal range. They might have less risk for some of those chronic diseases that we talked about. Their blood sugar metabolism might be better if they're, pre-diabetic or somewhere in, if they have diabetes. So there's a lot of benefits to testosterone. And most doctors make men wait until they're way below, down far below the normal range before they'll offer treatment. And I feel like we're not always doing the best service to men if we make them wait till it's that bad.
Well, by then, their self-esteem may have suffered. A lot of their relationships may have suffered. They're kind of flatlining, and all the people they used to do
Yeah.
active things with, or they kind of fall off the wayside. I can see how that would really be devastating. So you're saying, Dr. Deb, that the blood test doesn't necessarily tell you a whole bunch that you
You know,
can rely on. So how are there other factors that we can kind of put into the pot when deciding where a person needs to be as an individual?
yeah. Well, first of all, there are more blood tests that we can look at than just the total testosterone level. Some of the other blood tests are available. One is called a free testosterone, and this is the portion of the testosterone. So there's the total amount, but this is just the piece of it, the portion of it that is active and available to be used, because most of it is bound to carrier proteins. Most of it is inactivated. So if a man has more of these carrier proteins that are inactivating a lot of their testosterone, for whatever number of testosterone they have, the part that they can feel will be very small. If they don't have very many of these binding proteins, their number of total testosterone might not be that high, but they've still got a significant amount that they can feel. So we need to know more than just the total amount. We need to know how much is the active amount, which is the part that they feel. There's also a hormone that comes from our pituitary gland in the brain called luteinizing hormone, or LH for short. And this is a hormone that tells the body to make more testosterone. So for some men, their brain is stressed from chronic stress and inflammation. It's not making that messaging hormone to tell the body to make more testosterone. So it's not that they can't make testosterone, they're just not getting the message. And there are different ways that we can address that so that they can make more testosterone. On the other hand, if their body is not able to make testosterone, that hormone goes very high because their brain is shouting, please send me more testosterone. So it can determine how to approach the problem. And then another hormone that's really helpful for us to know about is estrogen, because men have estrogen too, and it is made out of testosterone. So if a man is making a certain amount of testosterone, but too much of it is being made over into estrogen, then their estrogen goes up and their testosterone goes down. And that doesn't feel good if you're a man. And if we give you more and more testosterone, like if we give you testosterone replacement therapy, for example, and then you just go make it into more and more estrogen, the estrogen can block some of the testosterone effects and cause some side effects, and then men don't feel as good as they could. So having a broader look at what's going on with testosterone is one of the ways for us to better understand what's going on, why is the testosterone level where it is, and what are the different options that we're going to have to make it better. But one more thing that I think is important is taking a history. We can tell from the symptoms when we suspect testosterone is low. And there's a quiz that we can use, a questionnaire that's been studied scientifically and validated so that we know that it really holds weight. And it's called the ADAM questionnaire, ADAM, ADAM questionnaire, and androgen deficiency of the adult male. Androgen is what we call testosterone. And people can actually go online and find this ADAM questionnaire. And if you take the questionnaire and at the bottom, it'll tell you if you said yes to certain questions, then that is an indication that you most likely have low testosterone. And that would be a good time to go and get checked out and see your doctor and have it evaluated further.
But do most our doctors, your major care provider in the United States, um, do most doctors go through all those steps and look at all those tests?
They don't look at all of those tests commonly, but um, more and more doctors are okay with checking a man's testosterone level. So if somebody is wondering for themselves if they think their testosterone might not be so great, generally, if they go into their doctor to ask, at least they can get a total testosterone level typically done. And it's interesting in my experience, if I have a man, coming in to talk to me for whatever the reason they've come into the office that day, and we start talking about, possibly testosterone issues, what I find is if I say to them, "Do you think that your testosterone level might be low?" Sometimes they'll say, I don't know, I think it's probably okay." And sometimes they say, "Yeah, I really think it's probably not that good." And they're usually right. Like, men can tell, that you don't know for sure necessarily without having a blood test to find out for sure. But generally, men are pretty good at predicting when they think their testosterone level is pretty good and when their testosterone level is not as good as it should be.
Well, it's a sensitive subject. Are some men embarrassed to admit that they think it might be low?
Yeah, absolutely. I think generally men don't really love going into the doctor at the best of times. And you don't always want to go in and admit that you think that maybe you're having a problem like this. But I feel like it's really important for us to let men know that this is just a medical problem, just like diabetes or high cholesterol or any other medical problem. It's really, really common. And this is something that we can treat. And it can have a really tremendous impact on how they feel today and on their risk for chronic disease in the future. So it really is worth something to talk about, and it's not something that we need to feel embarrassed about. Doctors are used to talking about this kind of thing. You
Well, I'm
know,
sorry to interrupt. It's time for us to take another station break. Dr. Deb and I will be right back to continue our discussion. So stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. Are hormonal imbalances messing with your mojo? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us discussing the link between hormones and emotions is Deb Matthew. Her website, signaturewellness.org. Deb, we touched in a little bit on how low testosterone can have very similar, symptoms as what women experience. What are some of the things that men experience that are novel to them?
Well, for men, erectile function is something that is can be tied to low testosterone. It's not. This is not the only cause for men to have this kind of problem. So testosterone doesn't always fix the problem, but it is something that can contribute. And for women, we would have things like vaginal dryness. So still kind of similar. But there really are a lot of things that are the same, and there's not a lot that are different. Men are less likely to have hot flashes than women, um, but otherwise, the low testosterone symptoms are very similar. The energy, the mood, the changes in our physical body, the changes in our metabolism, the risks for chronic disease are all very similar for men and for women.
So, is it common for men that are misdiagnosed, okay, that don't recognize there's a hormonal imbalance going on, seen as having anger issues or depression and be treated for those instead?
Yeah, you've probably heard of the saying like grumpy old men, and that comes from when men are low in testosterone. They sometimes don't feel so good. They're kind of irritable. And so sometimes, they're not always on their best behavior. And testosterone plays a really big role in how men feel and in how they behave. Interestingly, there was a study that was done that looked at male stock traders, and they drew their blood first thing in the morning, and then they just watched them when they were on the stock trading floor. And they found that the men who had the highest testosterone levels made the riskiest trades, and made the most money. So I'm not saying that higher testosterone will make you more money, but it affected their behavior. There are studies that show that if men are cheering for a sports team and their team wins, their testosterone level goes up. And if their team loses, their testosterone level goes down, just a little bit. But there are studies that show that when men have higher testosterone levels, it makes them more interested in status things like expensive cars or expensive watches, for example. So testosterone is very interestingly tied to how men behave. And so if they're low in testosterone, sometimes it's harder to cope with stress. They feel more anxious. They don't feel as good about themselves, and they can be more prone to things like anger issues, etc. When we give men testosterone replacement therapy or help them get their testosterone levels up again, that should help to make things better. One example of when this doesn't work out so well, though, is there are some men that take really big doses of testosterone, like men that are using the illegal forms of testosterone or illicit forms. They're taking very, very high doses, to try to get big muscles. So very high doses of testosterone can cause men to feel very angry and potentially have more outbursts. And so with testosterone within the realm of the normal range, we shouldn't see that kind of thing.
So what happens if we have, or does it exist if they naturally or unnaturally will have way too high testosterone?
Yeah, some men do have higher testosterone levels than other. There's not really any like disease process or anything bad that happens if testosterone levels are naturally a little higher than somebody else's. So we don't really see that as a problem. But somebody who naturally has higher testosterone levels may be somebody who is more competitive. It might be somebody who's more likely to choose to be like a trial lawyer or a race car driver, or, they may naturally migrate towards things that are more competitive and require maybe more confidence and drive. But we don't really think of it as a problem. Now, we can give somebody too much testosterone and we can cause side effects, but generally speaking, even if we did that, we gave somebody too much testosterone, most men don't come back complaining like, "Ooh, you gave me way too much testosterone." Generally, they feel pretty good with it.
So the testosterone levels, um, has there been a study done? I mean, we know menopausal levels, there's women become violent. But has there been any studies done around violent crimes and testosterone levels?
That's a really great question. I don't know the answer to that. There may well have been, but I can't say. I know that there's something called roid rage, right? When the men are taking too much testosterone, and sometimes they become a little bit aggressive and violent, and that's only at really excessive levels. But do men who are low in testosterone, who maybe have lower ability to cope with stress and deal with things, are they more prone to crime and violence? And I don't know the answer to that, but that would be something really interesting to look into.
Well, we know menopausal women can be, right?
That's right. That's right.
Watch out for the menopausal women. So, what's the most common diagnosis and treatment for misdiagnosed men with hormonal imbalances?
Yeah, a lot of men get diagnosed with depression and they get put on antidepressants. And if you think about some of the common side effects for antidepressants, they are sexual dysfunction, so like low libido, which is also usually a problem when men have low testosterone. Some of the side effects of antidepressants are weight gain, which also is relatively common when men are lower in testosterone. And antidepressants help people not feel horribly depressed. They can help kind of pick you up if you're down in the pits of despair, but they don't really make you happy. So if we take a man who the real problem is low testosterone, and he already has some sexual dysfunction, he already, is gaining some weight and he's not feeling that good, and we give him an antidepressant that makes him have less libido and gain more weight, those things are more depressing. So often they don't really get the results that they were looking for because it's treating the wrong thing. The same is true. They could be diagnosed with anxiety, and they could be given anxiety medications, which, depending on the type of anxiety medication, sometimes they're dependency forming, they can have side effects. Men are often given sleeping pills if they're not sleeping well. Those are some of the most common things that I see, but then a lot of men start to have trouble with their blood sugar, and so they're given medications for their blood sugar. Cholesterol can go up when testosterone goes down because these hormones that we're talking about, cortisol and testosterone and estrogen, they're all made out of cholesterol. So cholesterol is not a bad thing. It's a very important thing in our body. But if your body knows that it needs more testosterone, sometimes it makes more cholesterol, which is the building block for testosterone. But then we're just giving people cholesterol medications that lower the cholesterol more. So now we don't have enough of the building block to make testosterone. That can be a cause of low testosterone in men, especially if men have heart disease or risks for heart disease, and they're given bigger doses of cholesterol medication to make sure that their cholesterol levels go really, really low because we're worried about a heart attack. But then they don't have enough cholesterol to make testosterone, and then their testosterone levels go down, and that really even just increases the chances of heart disease. So it's an interesting balance.
What a tangled web we weave, right? It seems like going to the root cause is the only answer, right? But how do you find it? Do men often doubt their sanity while suffering with hormonal mood swings?
I guess I can't speak for all men. I don't typically have men coming in saying that. What they tend to come in and say is, I feel older than I think I should. And I feel like, that aging is really catching up to me. They often feel depressed or anxious. And it doesn't fit the circumstances. Like there's nothing really that they should feel sad or anxious about right now. But when you feel that way, your brain starts to search for, what should I be worried about or what should I be upset about? And we can always find something that we can, fuss over. But I do think that there are probably a lot of men who don't feel good and they don't understand and they have no idea that it has to do with their hormones. And so if you have no idea that it has to do with your hormones, what are you left with? Like you end up thinking, it's me, maybe I'm not a good person, maybe I'm just lazy, it's like a character defect, it's a character flaw. Instead of realizing I didn't used to be this way. And if we can get their hormones back in balance, they can just go back to feeling like themselves again.
There's a lot of bad press on replacing hormones, it's particularly testosterone, where it says it can cause heart attack. What's your stance on that one?
It's very complicated. There were some studies that came out, I don't know, must be almost 15 years ago now, at least 10 years ago, that started this idea that testosterone replacement therapy could be harmful to men. So where it really started is back in the day, we know that men have more testosterone than women, and men have higher risks for heart disease. So what we thought was testosterone was what was causing heart disease. Now we know that that's incorrect. It's estrogen that's protecting women from heart disease. So it's not that it was the testosterone causing harm, it's the estrogen in women causing protection. But then studies came out more recently that started to say, maybe this testosterone is causing some heart disease in men. And the studies themselves were very flawed. Like some of the studies actually included a bunch of women in them when it was only supposed to have included men, or they just looked at men who were given a prescription for testosterone, and then they watched whether they had a heart attack. But in the studies, they didn't even know, did the men ever pick up the testosterone? Did they take it? How long did they take it? What did it do to their testosterone level? So there was all kinds of things that were unknowns, which means that the studies weren't really strong studies. They weren't, they had a lot of flaws, which makes us really wonder whether the data is accurate or not. So what we do know is that men with low testosterone have a lot of risks for heart disease and diabetes and osteoporosis and dementia and arthritis and all kinds of things. And that normalizing testosterone levels can improve diabetes and mood. And, even if all that it did was improve mood, that can help men to get back to exercise and be more motivated to eat well and, just do the things that they can do in order to take care of themselves. So it's still somewhat controversial. We're still careful. If a man has heart disease, he's already had a heart attack. We already know we're very careful with what we do with testosterone. But for men who don't have a history of heart disease, and we don't want them to have a history of heart disease, testosterone can be really, really important.
So again, it's treat it with kid gloves if you already have a history.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense. So is it common for men to find their own imbalance and call it?
Yeah, I think men are learning. Like you said, there's lots of things out there about low T for men. So men are starting to learn more about it, and I think they're starting to ask questions. More and more doctors are learning about it and becoming more comfortable. So more and more doctors are starting to at least do the basic testosterone test. They may not call it low until it's quite low, but at least
Well,
it's starting to be looked for.
it's that time to take another station break. Please stay with us as Dr. Deb and I continue to explore the hidden symptoms of hormonal imbalances. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. So, your hormones are letting you down. How do you fix it? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with Dr. Deb Matthew. Her website, signaturewellness.org. So let's talk about how we can treat low testosterone. Um, what are our options? There's hormone replacements, obviously, but are there other things
Yeah.
that a person can do?
So the first thing that we want to start with is lifestyle habits. We want to make sure that men are eating a healthy diet so that they are getting the nutrients, the building blocks that we need to be able to make hormones. So important parts of a healthy diet for men are making sure that they're getting enough healthy fats. For so many years we told everybody you had to be on a low fat diet, but that's actually not true, and it's not good for your hormones. It just has to be the healthy fats. So extra virgin olive oil, nuts and seeds, wild caught fish. These all contain the kinds of healthy fats that our body needs, men and women, to make our hormones. Men need to make sure that they're getting enough protein in their diet, and lots of green leafy vegetables have some special nutrients in them that help our body process hormones in a healthier way. That we want to not be eating too much of the foods that make things worse. So sugar drives inflammation and it causes hormone problems. So too much sugar, too much of the processed carbohydrates, processed foods will actually drive testosterone levels down. Too much alcohol. Alcohol is a factor in causing low testosterone in men when it's in excess. So minimizing those and getting enough of the good nutrients. Another important thing for men is lifting weights. So exercise of any kind is going to be good, but specifically lifting heavy weights, depending on how old you are, you don't want to injure yourself, but lifting heavier weights sets off a reaction in your body that can actually help boost testosterone levels. Reducing stress is really, really important because we said cortisol, which is the main stress hormone, actually reduces testosterone levels. So things like going for a walk, trying some meditation or some breathing exercises, gratitude, just thinking about 3 things that you're grateful for. All of these things actually change the chemicals in your body and they can reduce cortisol. And over time, that can help to allow testosterone to improve. And one more, I guess we'll call it a lifestyle thing that is really important for men is trying to avoid environmental chemicals. We are all exposed to plastics and pesticides and all kinds of chemicals in the environment. A lot of these are hormone disruptors, which means they mess up how our hormones work. And one of the things that they do is they can lower testosterone. So antibacterial soap had an ingredient in it called triclosan, and they've taken it out now because triclosan lowered testosterone levels. Another one that we're worried about is called atrazine, and it's an herbicide. So people spray it on their plants and things in order to kill the weeds. But then it runs into the rivers and the streams, and it actually can turn boy frogs into girl frogs. Now, what exactly does it do to male humans? We don't know, because it's not like anybody's signing up for that study, right? To volunteer to take in a whole bunch of atrazine and see what happens. We know that it suppresses testosterone, but nobody's purposefully ingesting atrazine, but it's in our soil, it's in our environment, and it is getting into men's bodies. Bisphenol A, BPA, it's a chemical in plastic. So a lot of plastic bottles now will say BPA free. So avoiding plastics, avoiding fragrances. Some of those like men's body sprays and stuff, they have all those fragrances in them. Those fragrances are chemicals that aren't good for hormones. So doing our best to try to go for sort of greener versions of things and minimizing chemicals actually is important in order to have healthy hormones.
Well, you mentioned meditation, and stress is something that we can have maybe some control over, but probably not a whole bunch. If you're to take up, say, a meditation practice, how long does the effects of the meditation help with the stress, and how frequently does a person need to do it?
Yeah, the more you do, the better. So the more frequently and the longer the sessions. But if somebody is not a meditator, if this isn't really something that they're familiar with, starting small is good. Just like you wouldn't, if you wanted to start jogging, you're not going to start by jogging, 3 kilometers or 5 miles or something. You're just going to start by jogging to the end of the street. So even starting with just a few minutes can still make a difference. But ideally, it would be lovely to do something like 10 minutes a day to really get long-lasting benefits. Longer is even better, though.
But if you do it just once a day, that can take care of a fair amount of stress that you are exposed to during the day.
Absolutely.
That seems like a cheap fix. So, how important is organic?
Yeah, organic is important because pesticides get sprayed on foods. And, it's one thing you can wash your food, but the pesticides get into the soil and they get absorbed. So they're in the plant. Like you can't wash all of it off. And a lot of those pesticides have far reaching um, effects on our body. They kill off some of the good bacteria that lives in our digestive tract. They can affect our hormone levels. So trying to buy organic when possible is helpful. It's not always available. It's more important to eat fruits and vegetables at all than, if you can't get them organic. But it's actually the most important, if it's available, to look for animal products that are organic. So, like beef and eggs and chicken are even more important because the chemicals actually get concentrated as we go up the food chain. So something may have been sprayed on the plant, but then the cow eats a whole lot of that grass, and so the chemicals can get concentrated in the animal.
Well, I've heard it's not what you eat, but what you ate.
Exactly.
How about flora and fauna in the gut? Where does that play in here? Does it have any effect on
Yeah,
testosterone
that's it.
levels?
The bacteria that's in our gut play a big role in so much. Like we had no idea when I went to medical school how important it is. If we're specifically talking about hormones, the bacteria in our gut actually help us to excrete hormones, especially estrogen. And men take their testosterone, they make it into estrogen, and then it has to get excreted, and it's filtered from our bloodstream by our liver, dumped into our gut, and then it gets passed out through our colon. And the bacteria that live there actually help to control whether it goes out of our body or whether we reabsorb some of the hormones into our bloodstream. So having a healthy gut bacteria, a healthy gut microbiome is actually important for hormone balance.
So, are there any nutritional supplements that can help?
There are a lot of supplements that men have used over, the years to try to help naturally boost testosterone levels. One of them is called Tribulus. There's one called horny goat weed. They can help to some degree. depending on how low a man's testosterone is, the supplements may not be enough to really get him to a place where he feels better. So if it's just a little tiny bit low, it might help. If it's quite low, it might not be enough. Zinc can be helpful for men. That's important in testosterone balance. Another hormone that can sometimes help men is called saw palmetto. It helps us process testosterone. So there are some supplements. I generally don't tell men to just kind of head on down to the health food store and start shopping off the shelf. I think it's better to work with somebody that's going to help guide you and know your medical history and what your symptoms are to make sure that you're taking things that are going to help, not waste your money, not cause any problems, and give you the best results.
Yeah, all supplements are not created equally. We found that out, right? When you come to the point that you think, how do you come to the point when you think, we need to go look at hormonal replacement?
Yeah, depending on how badly somebody's feeling and how much they've already tried with their diet and lifestyle habits, at some point, adding the testosterone replacement therapy really can make a big difference. And, sometimes it's hard to do all the things that you're supposed to do, all the walking and eating your healthy foods and exercising and meditating when you just don't feel good and you don't have the motivation to do it. So adding in testosterone replacement therapy can really transform men's lives. And just like supplements, there's different ways of doing it. There are gels and injections and pellets and creams and all sorts of different ways. Some are covered by health insurance, sometimes not covered by health insurance. And then the most important thing, though, is it's not so simple that all you just need is a prescription, because the prescription is the starting point. You want to put the hormones in the healthiest body possible. So you still should be doing all the healthy things. And then we want to be monitoring your hormone levels and your symptoms and how you're feeling in order to fine tune and adjust the dose and make sure that we're getting it right. And this is where even doctors who are okay with checking a level and okay with writing a prescription don't always have the fine tuning, the art of medicine to really be able to adjust the doses so that men get the best results. And this is where I find that sometimes men are frustrated. They didn't feel that great. They tried some testosterone gel or something like that, and they didn't really feel much difference. And sometimes it's because the dose that they were given took them from a very low level to a mediocre level. But if they could have gotten to a better level, they could have felt so much better. But because it took them from below the range to back into the range, their doctor thought they were normal, even though they were still at the bottom end of the range. So if for men out there, if they're thinking about trying testosterone, it's okay. Like, go see your doctor, have a conversation about it. Don't be embarrassed about it. It can make you feel a lot better. It's worth it. But if you don't get the results that you were hoping for, don't give up, because it just may mean that there needs to be some fine tuning to really get you to the right place.
Well, Deb, we're about out of time, so it is my time to ask you, Dr. Deb, what's your mission?
I want for people to know that our health is up to us. We can't wait for our doctor to write a prescription to fix us. And so that's a good message, that we all have some degree of control over our own health. And I believe that living well is the best medicine.
Very well stated. Once again, it's absolutely wonderful having you on. I look forward to our next time in this series, but unfortunately, we are out of time. Dr. Deb, thank you so much for joining us again on Mission Evolution.
Thank you for having me.
Our guest this hour has been Dr. Deb Matthew, America's Happy Hormones Doctor. Dr. Deb is the best-selling author of This Is Not Normal, A Busy Woman's Guide to Hormonal Imbalances, and Why Can't I Keep Up Anymore? A guide to regaining energy, focus, and peak physical and sexual performance for men over 40. To find out more about Dr. Deb, where you can find her books and all she has to offer, visit her website, signaturewellness.org. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy past archived episodes, visit us at www.missionevolution.org. But please be sure to join us again right here on the Voice of Canada Broadcast Network, www.vocbn.ca, where this mission will continue, bringing information, resources, and support to a rapidly evolving world.